All right, I want to take a step back, talk about the Minnesota Wild and their extensions with Brock Faber and Marco Rossi. I just tried to make this video, but some lady came right up to the window and her dog pooped. So it was awkward because we were making eye contact while I was talking about this. This is a weird time. So we're starting over. Here we are. Might fly through this a little faster than last time because it was starting to get a little long. Brock Faber, we know his camp is having extension talks with GM Bill Guerin of the Minnesota Wild. Last year, in his first full season, 82 games played, 8 goals, 39 assists, 47 points. He was a -1 with 26 penalty minutes. Now, given my estimated range for an extension for Brock Faber would be 8 years. I think that kind of goes without saying. And it'll range between 8.5 and 11.5 million. Now, that's a $3 million range. We want to narrow that down a bit. I get that. Would it surprise me if it was 8.75 or maybe $11.25 million? Not necessarily, but at the end of the day, I think it's more realistic to look between that $9.5 and $10.5 million mark. Excuse me. Let's dive into why. These are player comparables. Now, keep in mind, this is just a stats and contract comparison. There's a lot more that goes into these negotiations, and this final number that I figure out, things like leadership qualities, which we know Faber has, things on and off the ice, items that really don't show up in stats, right? Defensive style of play is hard to quantify. These are all offensive numbers, for example. That's usually what we look at is offensive numbers. Faber is an excellent defenseman, especially in his own zone. He's a defensive defenseman first who has a little bit of offense to his game. He also took that number one defenseman position on a blue line, a very crowded, solid Minnesota Wild blue line. Spurgeon got hurt, but from the likes of Brodin, from a veteran like Jake Middleton, who after the first 20 games played very well. Right there were he's done very well for himself. Games on the line, Brock Faber is on the ice. There's no question. He's taking long shifts too, because John Hines, the coach, is like, stay out there. So comparables, Rasmus Dahlin, I have to have up here, $11 million extension for 8 years, signed in the offseason of 2021. The 3 years leading up, there were questions. Offensively he was fine. There were questions his first year of this dude a bust, which was crazy because he was 18. Second year in the league, broke out offensively, figured out how to play offense at an NHL level, which is tough to do, especially for a defenseman because you have to find that balance between offense and defense. Year 3, started to grow his defensive game quite a bit, although at -36 in 56 games isn't great. It was also a bad Buffalo Sabres team. Every year, incrementally, his defense got better and better, and this is what was this, 3 years ago now, 3 seasons removed. He's turned into a complete 200-foot defenseman who can score at a point per game and still be on the ice against the team's best offensive players. But at the time this was signed, there were questions about his defense. His offense was great a year prior and took a massive dip in the year leading up to this signing. Dahlin at the time, though, very high ceiling. He continued to grow his game every year. This is more of like a, hey, we'll pay you for what you're going to do in the future type thing. And I think the contract's aged just fine, honestly. But there were questions when this was originally signed. First overall pick, sure. But what has he done to earn $11 million for the next 8 years? And he's earned it to this point. So there's that. I got to have Dahlin on the board. Another Sabres first overall pick, Owen Power, signed a 7-year, $8.35 million extension last offseason 2023. After 1 year, Power, 79 games played, 4 goals, 31 assists, 35 points. He was a +10, 24 penalty minutes. Power's first year compared to Faber's first year. Now, keep in mind, I'm not saying Power is worse than Faber by any means because Power is 18, and I think Power is going to be an absolute stud. He's already shown significant progress. But his first year, his offensive stats, not quite where Faber's was in his first year. Right? Defensive play, Power's defensive play, there were questions. You could see he was a young kid and still had to learn how to defend at an NHL level. And he's taken massive jumps. Even from this last year, you can see he's taken massive jumps. I'm sure he'll continue to grow even more going into this next year. Owen Power is going to be a stud, and this is going to be a steal of a contract at the end of the day. But based off of the rookie year, Faber, slightly better stats, right? Offensively and defensively, a better player in that first year. Let me emphasize that. But moving on to Jake Sanderson. Jake Sanderson's contract extension is often compared to what Brock Faber's excuse me, dry throat, contract extension could look like. Sanderson, last offseason, signed 8 years, $8.05 million after his first rookie year, where he played 77 games, 4 goals, 28 assists, 32 points. He was a -6, 12 penalty minutes. Now, Jake Sanderson, very good in his own zone with some offensive upside, so fairly comparable to Brock Faber, right? But at the same time, stats, Brock Faber still scoring 15 more points, played five more games. Brock Faber also played hurt for the last 2 months. Excuse me, my throat's really dry. Hurt for the last 2 months with broken ribs. Jake Sanderson, at the end of the day, is a solid player, but I'd say apples to apples, first year to first year. Brock Faber, a little better defensively, and offensively, his stats are better as well. Not to say that Jake Sanderson is better or worse than Brock Faber now. Jake Sanderson is a fantastic number 1 defenseman in Ottawa at a bargain of a contract. But rookie year to rookie year, I'd say Brock Faber probably had the better rookie year. Nonetheless, I'm not picking between which player is better or more elite or has a higher upside, because I don't know. That's kind of opinion at this point. Moving on to Charlie McAvoy. Charlie McAvoy as a player is often compared to Brock Faber in terms of their defensive style of play. There are pretty big differences, though. McAvoy more apt to play the body when defending, whereas Brock Faber defends more of a finesse style. Both players get into the gritty areas. Both players are very good in their own zone. McAvoy also a lot more aggressive in the offensive zone. Keep in mind, Charlie McAvoy plays on one of the best team defensive teams in the NHL. So he can get lost in the offensive zone, and it's almost guaranteed there will be coverage on the back end for Charlie McAvoy, whereas Faber, pretty solid defensive team as a whole, but at the same time, there are question marks. It depends who's on the ice. If you drive up to the offensive zone, if you're in Minnesota, usually you're going to be covered on your back end, but there are times where you're not because players aren't quite all that apt to defending as they are in Boston, for example, right? It's just, it is what it is. It is what it is. So there are differences at the end of the day, but McAvoy signed a $9.5 million cap hit at 8-year extension in 2021. Keep in mind, this was three years ago. Do some quick math there. 4 minus 1. McAvoy, in his first 4 seasons leading up to this contract signing, 63 games, 54 games, 67 games, 51 games. Not didn't play a full season. Injury issues, and playing physical usually leads to some injuries. Goals, he scored 5 goals in 2 seasons, scored 7 goals in 2 seasons. Assists between 21 and 27, and points between 28 points and 32 points every single year through his first 4 years. Plus minus between 14 and 24. Keep in mind, this is a very good Bruins team he's been playing on. 2018-2019 year, they went to the Stanley Cup final and lost against the St. Louis Blues. Still kind of hurts because I'm a Bruins fan, but that was fun. It was a fun ride. So when we're looking at range in terms of comparables, you have to look at Dahlin as a bona fide number 1, which Faber is in Minnesota. He is the bona fide future number 1 defenseman of the Wild, because he already is. Young, both players going to continue to grow and develop and be even better, right? Dahlin, a little more of an upside there at the time. This is in 2021 as well, so given for cap inflation and so on, you're probably around like a $12.25 million cap hit at the time this was signed, roughly. NHL inflation adjustment, not real life inflation adjustment, because it'd be it'd be very different. Right, so on the upper end of Faber, comparable, getting slightly less than Dahlin, still in the upper tens, maybe $11 million. Power, I don't really like using Owen Power as an example, and even Dahlin, hit or miss. His former number 1 overall picks usually get the benefit of the doubt usually get a little more money because they should be a guaranteed superstar in the league for the most part. We know that doesn't always play out, but how many chances did Neil Yakupov get in the Edmonton Oilers, for example? What did he do to earn that? He was the number one overall pick, so that's what you got. And he was okay. He was serviceable for a hot second, but at the end of the day, but nonetheless, both of these guys are bona fide stars, or at least in power, star in the making. He will be a star shortly. Sanderson and McAvoy, I think, are very good comparables. McAvoy, 2021, $9.5 million extension. Last year, Sanderson, 8.05. I'd say realistically, Faber is somewhere between Sanderson and McAvoy in terms of what he should make. Now, again, McAvoy signed this in 2021. Cap has gone up. Cap will continue to go up through the years. So I'd expect this 9.5 to be a little higher for Faber, right? So McAvoy was signing a contract today. It would probably be like $11.5 million, for example, which I don't think Faber will be on that higher end. But I could see realistically Faber being somewhere around 9.75 or 10.25, maybe even up to 10.5, depending on how much they value that leadership for 8 years. So that wouldn't surprise me. Again, there's more that goes into this, but just for the purposes of this video, because I've already talked about it for 11.5 minutes, that's what I got for Brock Faber. That's what I think we can expect for an extension. Moving on to Marco Rossi. This is a lot more difficult. We're living in the NHL era where bridge deals are pretty much dead, and one that was signed by Jason Robinson was just about $8 million anyway. I think it was $7.75 million for 4 years. And Robinson, compared to Rossi, two very different players. Robinson is Jason Robertson, absolute bona fide superstar player. That dude is incredible. Even when he's not scoring, he's defending. He's doing something to contribute on the ice. Not to say Marco Rossi is bad or won't be that guy. I'm really high on Marco Rossi. I think this guy is going to have a fantastic career and is off to a great start. But stats-wise, apples to apples, I don't think they're the right comparison. There are things you can compare between the two players, but in terms of a bridge contract, which I think is what we're looking at with Marco Rossi, I'm not quite sure about that. And other than that, I got Rope Hintz on the board. He signed a bridge deal in 2020, 3 years, $3.125 million. This is signed 4 years ago. So this contract's over. He's getting paid, 8-point-something million. In the year leading to this bridge deal being signed, he played 60 games, 19 goals, 14 assists for 33 points. He was a +3 with 16 penalty minutes. Now, Rope Hintz, we saw the potential there, but it wasn't quite translating to in the stats. He's pretty solid two-way. Was he centerman? Plays very good hockey, and he's continued to grow, and he's incredible now. He's a fantastic player. But this is also 4 years ago. Stats are a little lower than Rossi, right? A little over $3 million. So you'd assume Rossi, just based on the stats and based on it being 4 years later than this contract, it would be a higher value. So to put in perspective, Ryan Hartman just signed a contract extension last offseason with the Wild. So did Marcus Foligno. 3 years, $4 million. I think Marcus Foligno was a 4-year, $4 million contract. So I had picked one. Ryan Hartman, a little more comparable in the player to Marco Rossi. 59 games played in the year leading up to the contract extension being signed. 15 goals, 22 assists, 37 points. He was a +7, 90 penalty minutes. But I think this kind of helps set the market as to what the Wild might be willing to pay. Marcus Foligno, Ryan Hartman, at the end of the day, pretty much third-line value players, right? You're paying them to be a third liner, essentially. And if they give you more, that's fantastic. Foligno, probably not going to give you top six upside there. Ryan Hartman can play in the top six, can also play on the fourth line. He's very versatile. But $4 million for a third line player is essentially the market rate in Minnesota as to what they're going to play. Now, Marco Rossi, playing about second line minutes, really solidified himself as that second line center the second half of last year. And I thought it looked great in that role as well. Pieces around him, kind of questionable at times. Marcus Johansson putting up 33 points in a full season with second line minutes is it's not great. Those are low. Even if he was on the third line with those stats, he would still be underperforming as a third liner. But nonetheless, Marco Rossi I thought did well. More of a playmaker type player, but adjusted his game, got gritty, got in front of the net, got some dirty goals, which is cool. Also, 47 penalty minutes. Marco Rossi is 5'9". He's a little dude. Again, way more of a finesse player. But keep in mind, there was a check to the back of Kirill Kaprizov. Marco Rossi dropped the gloves, and I forget who he fought, but it was an absolute mismatch in terms of a fight. Marco Rossi got 17 penalty minutes on that one play, which was incredible, and it was a huge boost to the team. And it was just crazy to see in person because Marco Rossi fighting is just a crazy thought in general, and he held his own, which was kind of crazy. So what are we looking at? It's a lot tougher to say what we'll look at with Marco Rossi. Should he get a bridge deal, which I would expect, right? I think Marco Rossi's camp would like to sign a bridge deal. The potential's there. The players are up and coming. Marco Rossi's stats will continue to get better and better as the years go on, right? I think this is easily, in a couple of years, you're looking at a player that's easily a point per game perennially. This dude is good. He's got the defensive style of hockey down as well. He can play that two-way center type of game, which is really cool to see at such a young age, right? But he's also really talented in the offensive zone and is finding different ways to score than he's ever done in his past. He's not a gritty player. He doesn't get in front of the net as much, but he's had to at the NHL level, and it's worked out for him. So when that finesse and stuff, the passing, that vision really starts to develop at the NHL level, which we've seen flashes of, I wouldn't be surprised if this is like a perennial 20 goal scorer, maybe 50, 55 assist player every year. It really wouldn't surprise me. So a bridge deal, we're talking about 2 to 3 years. I'd be surprised if it was signed 4-year deal. We're talking about $3.5 to $5 million. Realistically, on the higher end of that, I'd put it around $4.5 million is what I'd probably expect to see out of a bridge deal with Marco Rossi. Maybe like 4.6, 4.75. I think the 3.5 is really on the low end. But when you look at contracts throughout the NHL in terms of the stats, 3.5, probably $4 million is average, I guess. But in reality, bridge deal, young player, up and coming. I think somewhere north of $4 million, probably $4.5 to $5 million is pretty realistic for Marco Rossi. Now, if you're signing a long-term extension, which the Wild would want to do, lock a player up, add a cap hit that might look rough for the first year or two, but really end up paying out for the Wild, as they did with Matt Boldy, as they did with Joel Eriksson-Ek, as they did with Jonas Brodin, for example, and I think that was before Bill Guerin. Maybe even Jared Spurgeon you can make the argument for. I don't know if I go that far. Jared Spurgeon's fantastic, though. Right? So what would a long-term contract look like? I'd realistically somewhere between $6 and $7.5 million. I don't see it getting in the $8 million range. I really don't see it being... You can make a case for $6 million, but if it's a long-term deal, I'd expect somewhere around that $7 million mark, maybe 7.125 or something. Maybe $6.8 million, but I think so that's kind of why I have both on the board, right? Long term, the Minnesota Wild want to sign him long term, make it a great contract for the future. The player would want to sign a bridge deal, which is usually the opposite of what we want to see. Player would want to sign a bridge deal because his value will increase significantly. Even if it was a 1-year contract extension, wouldn't surprise me a whole lot. More of the players saying like, hey, let me prove that I can earn all this money that you think I don't deserve. But it's more likely to be like a 2 to 3 year deal. 3 years, probably, and I think about 4, maybe I don't know. I think if it's 2 years, you're talking about like a $4.25 million. If it's 3 years, you're probably talking about more like a $4.75 million contract extension. So that's what I got. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you agree, if you think it's a lot or too little. Obviously, with at least Brock Faber, we should be able to see what his contract extension looks like hopefully on free agency day, if not shortly after. Marco Rossi might take a little longer to come out and be public. But at the end of the day, it's always fun to look at this stuff. I enjoy looking at what contract extensions look like, what player values are. I'm a numbers nerd at the end of the day. I absolutely love diving into the numbers. So that's it. Appreciate you guys. Take care, right?